Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of XS Exceed. This is Gearface, here to learn all about Noel today, but I'm not alone. As a matter of fact, as with other episodes of this show, I've brought on a co-host slash victim slash expert. It's Bana again, here to round out, the third part of the Shoto Triangle from Blaze Blue, having already done Jin and Ragna with me. I'm super excited to learn a little bit about Noel. Bana, thank you for whatever reason being able to be convinced to put up with me again for another couple hours.
No, it's always a pleasure, Gearface. I'm excited to talk about Noel here.
Yeah, me too. So as always, real quick disclaimer before we get started. Number one, Exceed is a fun game. You can play it for fun. We're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. And if playing to win is not fun, or if the lines that we're describing are not interesting to you, please play in the way that you do find interesting. Um, Noelle's a cool character. You can definitely just sort of do funny, weird things with her and not care too much. So if that's what you're looking for, please do that. You'll play longer. You'll have more fun that way. Number two, we tend to talk in the show about pretty descriptive, or sorry, pretty prescriptive lines of play when we discuss how to play a character. We tend to say things like, you should always do this, you should never do that, this should always be what you're spending your gauge on, this is never a good idea. Bana less so than most. Bana tends to be pretty even-handed with his analyses, but in general,
That's because we've been talking about characters that
more flexible
have
characters.
a the flexible fundamentals based character. Noel, she will be a bit more streamlined than the last two characters we talked
Okay,
about. I will
you're
say that, but
you're gonna
still.
you're gonna be telling me how to run this character
Yes, yes.
correctly.
You will
Okay,
run Noel how I say, and there will be
no
no
deviation.
variation. Yeah,
Gotcha. And
exactly.
and now that browser exceed is a thing, if we find you running a different Noel line, we'll know. Um, so for real though, um, this is even with a more prescriptive character like Noel. Uh, this is just our opinion. I am not an expert.
Mhm.
Bana is an expert, but even his opinion is just his own. If you think that we've underrepresented a line for Noel, or if you think that we're evaluating her incorrectly, please let us know. We Exceed's not a solved game, and we are learning as much as everybody else is. So, and I'd love to turn this into a conversation. But yeah, Bana, I really, really am curious. Tell me a little bit about Noel here.
All right. So, um, as I said, Noel kind of has a straightforward line here,
Mhm.
but as you mentioned before, some opponents don't cooperate. Sometimes the cards just aren't aligning the way you want to. So, if you do find different lines, please absolutely go for them. This is just what I feel like is Noel's strongest win condition. So, going for this tends to be the most optimal choice here. So,
Got
let's
it.
let's go over that real quick. Actually, might as well. We're gonna go immediately to Noel's exceed side
Okay.
because that is what we're gonna immediately hone in on. So, well, I mean, yeah. So for 4 gauge, you don't get a kicker, but once you flip over, you have when you initiate, you have +1 speed and hit gain advantage.
Okay. And
Um,
that lasts for 3 or 4 turns, right?
that lasts for 3 turns.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, so with Noel here, you get 3 turns to create a advantage chain. And the idea is going to be you're just going to set up a combo and basically engineer a state where your opponent can't really interact with you. And that way you could either win the game from this or be so far ahead that you can close out the game without this ability here.
Okay.
You could also just you're building gauge while you're striking ideally. So if all things permitting, you could just flip again and finish off the opponent that way.
Right.
But that does require a lot of extra gauge there. So, um, but for the most part, with Noel, the idea is we're gonna flip and we're gonna beat up the opponent.
Okay. And I note that this says when you initiate a strike, your attack has +1 speed and hit gain
Mhm.
advantage. I'm assuming that because we are wanting to be advantage chaining as much as possible, uh, we're going to be initiating a lot on Exceed side. Like
Yeah, so
the sometimes I ask like, well, does my opponent, is my opponent going to be striking into me or not for a season 5 overdrive? When you have advantage with Noel, it sounds like you're just going to be spending it striking, and all 3 of your turns maybe are going to be taken right in a row,
that
and nobody's ever going to be able to initiate into her if everything's going correctly.
that is correct. You want to ideally strike on every single turn in overdrive.
Mhm.
Sometimes, it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes your opponent has like a slow way to gain advantage and then they steal it back and then you're sad. But aside from weird cases like that, yeah, you usually want to just strike 3 times and just be done with that. No, well, because there's no kicker on this, the opponent will have a turn to maybe try to run away from Noel on the turn she flips. But so long as you're in range, yeah, you're just not escaping that.
Sounds good. And then your overdrive effect as you're discarding cards from your overdrive allows you to close and retreat 1. So
Yeah,
you're
so you can
you're
it,
positioning.
it yeah, it adjusts the positioning. You can retreat, so you can run a mix up or just you know get into a more optimal range, and you can close to chase down anyone who's retreating there. So well, or just get into optimal range again. So it's a nice kicker. It is mandatory though, unlike a few that are optional. So you also have to keep that in mind when you are running the advantage chain. You could potentially put yourself out of position if you are not careful. So
Right. You can't. It's not. You may close or retreat 1. You have to move, and you
yeah, you
cannot
have
stay
to.
still.
So if
Okay.
if you're, I mean, close isn't as big an issue because if you're at range one and you're like, oh, I want to stay at
You
range one, you
you
just
just
take
bump them.
close.
Right.
But if you want to be at like range, if you're at range two is not a good example. Let's say you want to stay at like range three because you want to play an above curve assault at this point or something,
Sure.
and then you're like, oh well, now I have to like go to range four out of range with range four or close into range two. Where I mean, I guess it's on curve at that point, so it's not that big a deal. But
Right. But if you're
like
trying to stay exactly at range 3, if you're up against somebody who has a range 2 dodge, like Linne or somebody
yeah,
like that,
yeah,
you're like, oh man, I was trying to engineer something there. Okay.
yeah, exactly.
So that's her win condition then is exceed and beat up the opponent a whole bunch of times, and then either that's going to kill them or uh, you've generated some other kind of advantage in those 3 turns so that you can kill them later on. How does
Yeah,
that
that is.
how does that generation of obviously the the game state advantage is important here, but when we're talking
Mhm.
about advantage as like a long-term win condition kind of thing, if I'm striking into somebody as Noel and I'm winning mix-ups and awesome, I'm doing damage and this is all working great for me. It's not a situation like when we talked about like Jin's Exceed mode where we're depriving my opponent of resources. Like if this doesn't kill them, what what was the value of it other than just being able to, like my opponent can still strike on my turn. They're
Mhm.
responding. Like how does this get me closer to victory other than just making my strike stronger? I guess is my question.
So I mean, I guess the short answer is it really doesn't. It's just about trying to get as much damage and getting as high a lead or closing out the opponent's life total or as soon as you can. Sorry, give me 1 second. That's my alarm for whatever
No,
reason.
no worries.
Sorry, I totally forgot I had that on.
It's all good.
Yeah. Let's see. So the idea is you're gonna essentially get to a point where you can like finish off the opponent is kind of the idea. Like with just a normal strike essentially.
Okay,
One of Noel's weakness is going to be resource. Her resource scheme is pretty bad actually. So if will be games where you feel inclined to exceed and then you just run out of gas and then you're at the mercy of your opponent. So a good Noel game plan is to try and get to this state and still have enough gas in the tank where you're not instantly dead afterwards.
got it.
And that's what's going to separate a good Noel player from a bad Noel player.
Okay, and if I'm spending uh if I'm spending 3 turns striking, that's 3 attacks that I'm putting down. Uh, and my hand is probably dwindling from that, but maybe my
Mhm,
opponent's hand is dwindling from that too because they're trying to respond to me. Um,
mhm.
so I'm able to kind of, as long as I keep on winning those mix-ups and as long as I keep on pushing the advantage, like am I going to exhaust them too when I'm doing this, or is it really just like the damage and positioning and advantage generated by my attacks is what's going to carry me through it?
So I would say it's going to be more so the latter.
Okay.
Um, because the worst, I would say like the best case scenario for the opponent is maybe they're in a situation where they can accept that what chances are we're losing most of these strikes. We'll just wild swing and conserve resources, and then we'll just get you when the overdrive is done.
Right.
That is a concern. Um, but usually, like I said, you want to, as a good Noel player, you want to keep cards in hand to defend yourself against someone who's going to do that. Um, Also, if you're like low on resources as Noel and you're just in a situation where you feel like you have to exceed and try to run offense, but the number of cards in your hand is just like low, you feel like you can't generate a good I guess a good chain, you can still try the exceed and go for some wild swings. Noel has some pretty consistent range bands that you can take advantage of if so long as you stay within like range two,
Okay.
and you can just try that and let RNG take the wheel for a
Okay.
bit. It's not great, but if you're like behind and that's like your only way out, it's totally a valid line.
Okay, and odds are, something's going to happen with +1 speed and some decent range bands on my
Yeah,
attacks. That makes sense.
Noel. Yeah, with plus Noel tends to be one of the more faster characters when it comes to attack shapes, and
Yep.
we'll go over that in a bit. Um, so with the +1 speed, chances are you're going to be able to hit, or even if you do wild swing something that's like maybe below curve. I mean, the +1 speed improves your odds, and it's not like your opponent will always call your wild swing correctly.
Sure.
um
It's still a mix-up.
yeah, it's still going to be a mix up one way or the other. So we it's not ideal, but it's something you can definitely try to do for sure.
Right. That makes sense. And so what you've just described is the mentality and the game plan for what it sounds like is 3 turns of the game. And there are other turns of the game where I'm not going to have this ability.
Mhm.
Is my mindset during those turns when I'm this Noel just get gauge to exceed again? Am I continuing to be that aggressive the way that I am in my exceed mode, or is it kind of more of a slower paced, more methodical ramp up into this burst of aggression for a few turns, and then I go back into this period of rebuilding again? Or is she pretty much like foot on the gas all the time, go, go, go?
I would say, if so, the ideal Noel game is foot on the gas, go go go. She is very much a rushdown character.
Right.
um The only thing stopping her from putting her foot on the gas is the fact that Noel has student loans to pay, and she doesn't have a lot of income,
Right.
and therefore her the gas in the tank is kind of empty.
Yeah.
She
In
does
this
not have a
economy,
lot of
can you
yeah, yeah.
afford to
Mhm.
to run your car that much, really? And it's
Yeah,
winter. Yeah, it's a problem for her. Okay.
yeah, exactly. So she doesn't have a lot of card economy. I mean, she has one card that kind of like helps her with that, but for the most part, it's going to be you're trying to play as much rushdown as you can, but your way of reloading is the prepare action or the change cards action.
Okay.
So you will have to give your opponent or a turn as you take time off to recoup your resources, and that's probably like the challenge with Noel is you got to balance, you know, pedal to the middle offense with making sure you have options.
Right. And knowing when to slow down and when to speed up. But
Hmm.
it's not a
Yep.
situation where like with some like the way that Hakumen might be played, for example, where his uh, or one line of him at least is like his front side ability is very very passive and very methodical, and then when he exceeds, it's go time. Like for Noelle,
Hmm.
it's go time until she can't go anymore, and then she's got to stop. But she's not going to stop on purpose.
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. It's you want to be yeah, you want it to always be go time. Just the universe conspires against you and says, "No,
Right. Sometimes you don't
at
have
some point you got
infinite
to take
cards in
a
hand.
break.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
can't stay up all night. You can't always eat junk food. I'm sorry."
Right. All right. So, but that's the game plan: is be as aggressive as we can afford to be,
Hmm.
reload when we absolutely have to, and then exceed and just that makes us go faster, and
Hmm.
we push him even more, and eventually we just overwhelm him.
That is the idea. Yes.
Okay. Then what is her? We haven't even looked at her front side character ability. So it's no advantage. It's when you initiate a strike, you spend one gauge to gain one speed. So it's basically a crit
Yep.
effect.
Yeah. Well, it's a crit effect on your turn. It's
Oh,
not
that's right.
quite.
Only on your turn.
It's not quite. Jin's the only one who gets a full crit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Noelle gets a half crit. If she absolutely feels like she needs that extra +1 speed on demand, she can pay a gauge for that.
Okay, but
The reason I
because
started,
we're trying to be building up to 3 gauge to exceed, 4 gauge to exceed. I'm sorry. We might not be doing that too often.
uh, so the ideal is you never use this,
Okay.
but there will be situations where you kind of have to. So don't treat this like a blank ability, but don't treat it like, oh, this is the UA I want to invest my gauge in. Noelle has way better things to spend her gauge on between this overdrive and the ultras we'll be talking about later.
Okay.
But occasionally you have situations where your opponent boosts speed in order to deter you, and you think to yourself, well, if I pass the turn without striking, they're just going to leverage those boosts in order to make life even more miserable. In that case, one gauge is worth dismantling that setup there.
Right, but
So
you need to decide that based on not just the outcome of that strike, but also that you're investing the gauge in the first place, and
correct.
that math might mean that you're not doing that very often.
Yep, that
Okay,
is correct.
that makes sense. Well, cool. All right, so that's the mindset, that's the game plan, and I'm sure we'll revisit some of that stuff as we get into the
Hmm.
kit. Anything else about her? And and we talked a little bit about sort of the economic concerns that she has.
Hmm.
Anything else before we get into the kit itself that you want to mention about sort of the
No,
big picture?
I think we want to get into the kit because it'll start to form the bigger picture a little better. Because we say Noel's a rushdown character, but like we could say like, hey, the UA reads rushdown, but if like the attacks don't read rushdown, then
Right,
you wouldn't be a rushdown character.
definitely.
So let's we might as well move on to the specials here. We'll start with we'll start with the projectile. Why not? We have optic barrel here. It says range 2 to 3, but this is actually a projectile. It's a very expensive one. you do have to spend a force in order to make it a longer range move. But
Right.
it is still a part of the move don't move mix up. You can use this to shoot the opponent and not move in if they defend with sweep. But um, like I said, it's expensive. This will be a theme with Noel. A lot of her strikes will be expensive.
Right.
Um, means the whole foot on the gas, go 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 idea is further hampered. If you're spending 2 cards a strike, you tend to run out of cards quickly. So
Definitely. Right. Okay.
um, another thing to note of this card is it is her highest damaging special. So you probably want to land one of these over the course of a game. But once again, it's a 2 force strike. You don't
Right.
want to rely on this. You'll run out of cards really quick.
Okay. And most of the time when you're using it, you are using it as a projectile. So if I'm in that range
Yeah.
2 to 3 band, uh, it's a mid speed that doesn't
hmm
beat slows, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe it. It's got the stats to be a cross catcher, but it's a very expensive cross catcher, so
Right.
you usually don't want to be doing that. But if you'd rather just let the opponent cross out and then shoot them, rather than trying to catch the cross. But
Okay.
if you won't need to make the read, you can do it. But
Right. And as you mentioned, this is her highest damage special, but also at only
mhm.
5 damage, like looking at the rest of her kit, she doesn't have a lot of damage.
Yeah,
In
her damage is relatively light. That's why you kind of want to rely on the exceed, because if a character can just like do the same amount of damage Noelle does in with one strike with that she requires two to do,
Right.
you really do need advantage to
and
actually like make up the difference.
you're
Yeah.
not trying to trade with Noel, then you're trying to win pretty cleanly.
Yeah, no, you will. As we go further along, we'll see that Noel has a lot of cards that just win. So, yeah, the idea is going to be you're going to win the strikes cleanly, not by much, but you're going to win them clean, and that way you can, you get a buffer. So for when you do trade there, so
Okay. And
er,
because I could use Optic Barrel in the same circumstances in terms of like its range band and its speed and its damage. And actually, every one of its stats is identical to Spike. But
mhm,
it's not breaking Sweeper Focus. I don't want to be
yeah,
trading with Sweeper Focus, so maybe I shouldn't be
no,
using it at range 2 to 3 at all,
uh,
other than to catch
usually
cross.
not.
Okay.
Yeah, you're usually like like I said, um, you can use it as a cross catcher, but like the risk reward of catching cross becomes much less appealing when your cross catcher costs 2 force
Cost an
essentially.
extra force to actually do
Yeah,
anything to it. Okay.
yeah. So that and one, if you hit a sweep with this, like you're down 3 cards now. It's
Right.
brutal. So
Right. So
the only
it's a
time you would use this at like close range is if you're wild swinging it, and you can confirm the hit.
got it.
That's really the time you would use it at close range there.
Okay. So I'm looking to use this when I'm at range 4 or 5, and my opponent is is expecting a dive in or some other kind of advance, and I'm looking to kind of be a little bit greedy and try to get that 5 damage
hmm
in from far away.
Yeah,
But it's also a range 3 to 5 uh, fireball is not exactly like a counter zoning tool either. Although I guess it does have an
yeah,
advance afterward. So I'm not really using
mhm.
it to fireball war. I'm using it as part of a mix up.
Yeah. Usually, you want to use it as a mix-up, and it's a good way for Noelle to open. Like it'll get her like the first gauge. It is a little bit costly, but if it lands and your opponent blocked or chose the wrong option, or like they wild swung into a fast move or something and didn't hit you, like it's great there. You can close back in, or if you decide to stay back at range 4, usually range 4 is pretty safe unless you're fighting another zoner. But if you're fighting another zoner, probably like initiating with optic barrel is not your first priority anyway.
Right. You
So
got to get
like
in.
if you're yeah, so you might initiate with this. If they sweep, you stay back, and then you prep for a turn, and then get ready to close in. That's kind of like the canonical use for this tool, and then after that, like the usage really plummets. But like I said, it's 5 damage, so you probably want to land at least one of these that over the course of the game, just because it's a sixth
Right.
of your opponent's
Yeah,
life,
we
and
got to count to we
Noel's
got to
kind of
count to
trapped in
30 somehow
sanity.
here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Do we want to
All
do
right.
attacks and boosts at the same time, or should we just go through the specials first?
Well, we'll go through the attacks first, just because it makes sense to talk about these three kind of in tandem.
Okay.
Um, so we'll start with, I guess, type one. We have a 1, 2, 3, 5 that if that has dive text for advanced two.
Right.
You can use that as your part of your move don't move mix up, but you'd rather use this at close range to use the dodge effect and treat this as a mid speed.
Right.
We have another mid speed in muzzle flitter. It's an expensive mid speed because the text there says spend one force to give it ignore guard.
Yep.
Um, Once again, similar to optic barrel, it's expensive. You can only you play this more than optic barrel because it does more things Noel wants than optic barrel does, but we'll get to that in a bit. And then we
Right.
have assault through advance one, push three. It's your kick shape, beat sweep. Doesn't beat focus, but uh, as kick shapes do, you beat one, but you don't beat the other. So yeah, we have a trio of mid speed options here. Um, this
And
is probably what
all
makes
of them like just barely mid speed too. Like even when you're using type 1 as a mid speed when you're close up, like 5 speed is not that far below curve. Or
yeah,
muzzle flitter might be doing less damage than spike, but it's doing enough damage to stun focus.
yep,
Um so and it's 5 speed at range 2. Like that's fast enough. So I kind of see what you mean
mhm,
about a lot of her attacks kind of just win.
yeah, yeah. These three moves are kind of the Noel experience. It's I'm gonna play moves that are pretty fast for what they tend to be,
Right.
but they do less damage. So I'm gonna win this straight clean, but it's not gonna hurt that much.
I'm gonna win it for 3 or
Um,
4, I'm gonna win it for 6 or 7.
yeah, yeah. Well, more like 5 or 6, because
Right. Right.
Spike's the canonical like mid speed, right?
Right.
So,
Sure. Or dive. Both are
um,
5. Sure.
yeah, exactly. So that's that's gonna be Noel. If you really want to land these, you could use UA, and then suddenly it's on curve mid speed, just slightly below curve mid speed.
Right. But excuse me. But because of the gauge concerns,
Hmm.
we aren't we aren't super interested in making these a hundred
Yeah,
percent consistent instead of 90% consistent or something.
you'd rather go like hedge your bet on the 90%, but there will be situations where you feel like you have to spend the gauge. I mean, on assault through, like, you might want to do that just because it's far below what these two are,
Right.
and it gains you advantage, so you can at least like make up the difference on the gauge expenditure by either like prepping or like striking again and gaining the gauge that way.
Right.
Um, and there, type one here, it does have like a movement effect. Sometimes you're in the corner and you just want to get out of the corner and you just want to make sure that that absolutely happens, and you
So
might spend the gauge
you
there.
spend some gauge on it,
But
but you kind of need. It sounds like you need a reason more than I want to win this strike.
yeah,
It's
yeah, you
more
want a re
it's more like I want to win this strike. Like this strike is
correct.
important. I need to win it for sure. They've got +5 power on their sweep or something like that. I need to break
Hmm.
sweep.
Yeah, yeah. You need to be able to like dodge their sweep if they're threatening that, or yeah, that
Right.
and you feel like you well, you're gonna dodge sweep at either speed anyway, but it's more like a better like an example is they're threatening to or they your opponent moved to a range where they're threatening to cross out and of like avoid your offense and your type or your optic barrels are down.
You don't have any answers
You
if
might
they try to zone you. You got to
yeah
keep them in close.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you might do it that way. Like, yeah, you usually want to have a reason to spend the gauge. It's not you're not there to make the offense more consistent, like because then you're spending all your resources to beat what cross.
Right.
They only have two crosses in the deck. So like they can only do it so many times. Just beat whatever else they have.
Right. Okay. And these cards are pretty good at beating things. I mean, a cross up dodge and ignore guard on 3 power uh, beats a
Hmm.
lot of things. And assault throughs push 3 gets you out of a lot. Like
Hmm.
most guarded options don't have the range band to really contest that.
Yeah, that's correct. But yeah, like I would say like in terms of how good your mid speeds are. So like you have type one, that's like your best one because you dodge. You don't have to break guard if you dodge, and this isn't costly. This one it's pretty consistent, but it costs you an extra force if you want it to do the thing you want. And then assault through is like the least consistent one out of them, and even though it wins, it can be positioning negative.
Right. If
But
I'm trying to keep them in a little bit closer.
mhm, yeah.
Okay.
So
And then I
but
can't
yeah,
help but notice that when we're talking about, if only you could add 1 speed to them without spending gauge.
yeah.
Uh, so now all of a sudden, these are real hard to beat, actually, in
Right?
some positions on her
This
exceed
is
mode.
another reason why you want to just go for exceed instead of spending a gauge every single time, just trying to make these unbeatable. You can just exceed, and then you can go, oh yeah, these two are basically unbeatable,
Right.
and I even gain advantage. So the turns, or I don't even have to pass turn to the opponent and let them hit me. So that's why like exceed Noel is probably the strongest line you can be running.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of on the strength of these 3 cards and the things that they
Mhm.
beat. Um,
Yeah.
that you add, I mean, it's you add speed to a mid speed, and all of a sudden you've got some really, really dangerous attacks.
Mhm.
That makes sense for just kind of exceed fundamentals.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm playing these as part of my mix ups. They are all slightly under curve. Uh, my opponent has crosses, and you mentioned they only have 2 of them. Some characters do have a couple of really, really scary range 2, like on curve at range 2
Mhm.
offensive options. I'm thinking about like Ken's axe kick, for example.
Mhm.
Um, does Noel or a DP or something like that? Does
Yes,
Noel?
as a matter of
Yeah,
fact, she does. She has a
I was,
DP right
it,
here in Spring Raid.
I was about to ask. So she needs incredible segue. She needs something to catch her opponents trying to just consistently respond to her on curve and shut down her offense. That's what this is for.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll usually use I mean, I would usually use Spring Raid more offensively as Noel just because you do need to catch people's on curve options. But a DP is also still a DP, so you can still use it like a DP and use it on defense as well.
Right.
Um, while we're on the subject of playing on defense, you can also use these mid speeds on defense. as well. Like they're a lot more consistent on defense compared to your average mid speed because they're so fast,
Yeah,
right?
they're still pretty
Um,
fast.
there are plenty of times when the opponent will. I mean, when you first, so like layer one with against Noel, his opponent initiates with their fasts because they don't, or they don't want to get caught by these,
Right.
and you know if they're playing a fast at like rain, was it if a fast that closes in like optic barrel is going to miss, and none of these have guard.
Right.
So Noel kind of has a, I don't want to call it a weakness to fasts, but she lacks tools to defend against an opponent who decides I'm just going to play on curve all day.
Right.
Um, but,
Luckily not too many characters can do that forever at range 2.
yeah, they can't do that forever. I mean, range two or range one.
Right.
Sometimes you will be playing these at range one because that's just where you are, and they're even more more under curve than at range two.
But
Um,
also, I mean, when you're talking about mid speeds, you want to be playing them in a situation where your opponent is
mhm,
going to be playing the thing they beat, right? And
yeah,
if sweep and focus are really really good at range 1, you might be playing these at range 1 because
yeah,
that's when the
exactly.
sweeps and focuses will come out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they might. Like I said, layer one is we're gonna play the fasts to beat these, but either they are gonna run out of fasts, or well, you can't like you know as a Noel player, you will know this. You will play your focuses and sweeps to defend against opponents who decide I'm gonna go fast.
Right.
So eventually they will have to go. Okay, maybe they'll defend with the slow here, or maybe they just don't have any other option, and you have the read that they're going slow. You can just defend with these and just win the strike on their turn. In which case, like you have massively swung tempo in your favor.
Right. And again, if all of that hedging your bets about what your opponent's going to do sounds too complicated, that's what this is for.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. So just mitigate that speed disadvantage. Is it ever worth it? Ever is tough, obviously, but how often do you find yourself like EXing one of these mid speeds to make them totally safe? Do you want to maintain the threat of the other one too much to give up both just to win a strike?
Um, I mean, so that all depends.
Sure.
I find like it's hard to have EXs with Noel just because her economy's like pretty bad. EXing this is like okay, but it's one of your best cards. So if you EX it, like you're now down both copies of Type One, and that hurts. EXing Muzzle Flitter, if you're in the situation where you have to spend the one force, like okay, now I've spent 3 cards to
Mm,
break guard.
right.
Um, it's the EXing with Noel is very expensive, and like these are if you need the EX, usually you want to go, oh well, let's improve the speed band. In which case,
With
you
this,
you
I
can't
was
just rely
actually
on the gauge as well.
I was going to say it's similar logic about why you generally
Mhm,
shouldn't spend gauge on these attacks, but for an EX instead. Like it's a similar outcome of like you need to have a pretty good reason to do it.
mhm. Yeah, you have to have a good reason. Like I won't say I've never EX'd with Noel because there are some times like you can't use this on defense.
Sure.
So if you feel like, oh, I have a read that my opponent is playing a move that I have to beat with an EX, like you do that. Um, but once again, like I said, it tends to be pretty expensive for Noel, and usually the +1 speed is not it's not enough to warrant EXing, just because once again these tend to be pretty fast for mid speeds,
Right.
and you can usually beat like a threatening thing with one copy.
Right. That makes sense. And if they're gonna, again, barring things like axe kick that are extremely dangerous, if they're gonna lose to something at 5 speed, they're probably not gonna lose that hard.
Yeah, yeah. Um, that's usually what's yeah, if they're like if they're threatening something and you need to mitigate and then you end up like losing to the wrong read, at least if like because like let's say you were reading like oh maybe range trying to think of an example. I don't know, like they boosted a bunch of power and they're threatening to hit you with like I don't know, an assault and just don't have a way to defend against it. And it turns out, oh no, they crossed instead. You'd rather like lose to the cross with one type one than
Sure,
lose both, right? So,
sure. All right, that makes sense. And so basically, like it sounds like in terms of her kit shape or her attack shapes, it's pretty simple stuff. Like pretty
mhm,
classical DP, positional dive like mid speed, basically spike like mid speed, and then a kick, and then
yeah,
her expensive move don't move mix
projectile.
up at 3 to 5.
Yeah,
Okay,
so yeah, it's because we have like the projectile, the DP, and I guess technically this counts as the Tatsu type one here.
right,
It's why we call Noel a Shoto, but I would say she's less fundamentals based. I don't want to say less fundamentals based because everyone needs to rely on fundamentals,
right,
but unlike the last two Shotos, where it was okay, you gotta just play good exceed. Well, like Ragna doesn't have a clear win condition other than trading. Jin was bury the opponent in card advantage, but Noel's is just we're gonna just strike a whole bunch.
right, and we're
So
gonna win. So it's less less reliant on like Shoto style fundamentals and more just like you need to know how to rush people down.
yeah, exactly. That's a better way to put it.
Right. Okay. And so we're talking about things like knowing how to reevaluate your cards based on what options are left on your opponent's side, or
Hmm.
key like those kinds of fundamentals, not necessarily like how to how to boost war or how to
Hmm.
craft an unbeatable sort of like Ryu style strike.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Noel's boost kit is also very, I would call it more Swiss Army knife like rather than like these big giant things like Ryu has.
Sure.
So crafting unbeatable strikes is not going to be something you're going to do with Noel. You're going to run your offense, and sometimes that offense comes with a risk. So
Right.
it's
And
about
and you have consistent enough shapes to make those risks be consistently in your favor, but they are
mhm,
still they're never guaranteed.
correct.
Okay. That
All
all makes
right.
sense.
Well, we might as well finish things off with the ultras. We might as well
Sure.
talk about the strikes first, just because Noel is it's about striking. Not, I mean, you will use your boost, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Sure.
I mentioned she has other things to spend her gauge on. We have her two ultras. They are, I would call them all right. They're not amazing, but they're exactly what she needs. I guess we'll start with Zero Gun Fenrir. You have a 2 gauge, 1 to 5 7 for with push two, draw two. Um, you would normally call this a kind of mediocre shape, but
Hmm.
it's still 5 power. No, we mentioned Noel lacks power,
Right.
so this is another way to like at least improve her damage output a bit. It also has hit draw two, so it's a little bit of economy. You're spending 2 gauge for draw two, so it's not. I wouldn't call it efficient economy, but it's very high tempo. Instead of changing cards from your gauge, if you're at range one and you just want to keep your offense going, this card will do the job very well.
Right.
Um, you know, I usually it's not my favorite attack to play, but I've still find myself using it often enough that it's always a consideration.
Right. And
I guess we'll.
two gauge is expensive, but it's not, backbreaking.
Mhm.
The real problem is that that's getting you farther away from your exceed
Yeah, it
mode.
gets you. Yeah, that is the concern. Is it gets you further away from exceed mode. But I don't. Most games I find like Noel is you usually budget for one exceed activation and one ultra.
Okay.
Sometimes it'll be two exceed activations, no ultras, and sometimes you're in a matchup or in a game where it just things just aren't going your way, and it's gonna be what, no exceed mode today. We're just gonna be using the ultras today.
Right. And
Yeah.
we're going to be relying on, like you said, kind of tempo swings rather than super
Hmm.
efficient card draw or super efficient resource usage, but at least fast resource usage, which is kind of
Yeah.
what she needs to
Exactly.
do. Okay.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
All right. We'll move on to Bulletstorm here. Here's her ignore armor option. It's a it's a 3 to 4 though, so it can be a little bit awkward, and it's 3 gauge, which means having access to this is a little tough sometimes.
Right.
But
You kind of
it
want to
is
be,
a
you're kind of feeling like I got 3 gauge, one more hit and I can do my real thing. I can
one
exceed,
more
and
hit.
that's what I'd prefer, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But this is a because it is ignore armor at 6 damage. It's a pretty good game closer.
Right.
Um, I would even say the most ideal line with Noel would be to exceed with, I would say, uh, you can either exceed with, like, let's say 5 gauge. Well, you spend 4 and you have 1 left over,
Right.
or um, or just maybe exceed in general. After your like once you're done your advantage chain, and either you flip, or like in the middle of the advantage, or not the middle, but like let's say at the very end before you flip over, or as at the end when you flip over and
Right.
you use UA or something here with the extra gauge, you bullet storm them and then finish them off that way
Right. Okay. So because you're building gauge while
as you
you're
strike.
striking in
Yeah.
exceed mode, and your attacks are pretty consistent in exceed mode, you're likely to end with, you know, enough gauge to at least be pretty close to this, or be pretty
Mhm.
close to doing this again. But if you're
Mhm.
trying to finish the game off, that's what Bulletstorm is for.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, there is an uninteractable line. Well, it's never completely uninteractable, because your opponent can always have an EX or an above curve option they've been saving. But
Right.
if you have EX Bulletstorm, and you save it for the end, and you use her UA, you can have a 6 speed ignore armor, and
Yeah.
that's
Seven. If
yeah.
they have less than 7 health, the game is over basically, unless they
Yeah, the
have
game's just over. Yeah.
like literally EX cross, I think is what you got for that.
Yeah, you need literally EX cross, or you have a
Yeah.
character specific thing
And
that lets you
and
do that.
and if they're holding EX cross, that means that they've probably spent most of the game dying to these things.
Yeah, usually.
Okay, I got you. So that's your combo kill. That's your
Yeah,
if all of the, but like you said, her economy is such that you can't really afford to craft your hand over multiple turns. So if you're just
yeah.
you kind of have to play it with what you got, it sounds like.
Yeah, usually you wanna play it with what you got. Usually, like, I mean, ending with this isn't that unreasonable, just 'cause, usually this will be in your hand, like, you're not usually striking with it. If you look at the boost, it's not a high priority boost either.
Sure.
Usually it's like you're changing cards with this, or you're actually like, or it's in your hand and you can just finish them
And
off
you're
with
actually
it.
setting it up, and you might, like,
Yeah.
if you aren't going to be holding this card from if you mulliganed into it, but if you pick it
Hmm.
up mid game, you might keep it around to see if you can set up the kill shot at the end.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Like I said, it's as I mentioned with Noel, there's a lot of you take with you make use of what you got, but occasionally I mean, you can make it work, or you can maybe the stars align and you can you can get the full confirm there, and that's always satisfying.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And that seems honestly that's a
Mhm.
pretty fun kit. I mean the sort of rush down. I'm not good at rush down characters, and so when I'm looking at this stuff, when I coming from my like defensive set play mindset, I'm like, all this stuff seems so unsafe. It loses to things, but like no, she can do the advantage is tempo, right? You can do this every turn,
Yeah,
and you can run the opponent over before they have time to respond. You're not
exactly.
setting up something totally unbeatable. I got to kind of get in that
Mhm.
mindset a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing quite like or satisfying as a successful Noel advantage chain. So I
Yeah,
highly recommend this character to anyone who wants, or any Reese mains from season one who are sad that Reese rotated out.
right.
You're not as powerful as Reese though, so I guess disclaimer there.
Yeah, you've got to make do with what you got though. What about Valkyrie Vale? We've talked about
No.
Astrals a couple times here, and I know that they're kind of hit or miss. What's the
All
read on
right.
Valkyrie
So
Vale?
Noel's is a miss.
Okay,
It's we had all the issues with Astrals that are universal, and then we have Noel here. She doesn't want to spend tempo reshuffling to get this Astral, and even when she gets this Astral, like she's not really gonna use it. We have It's a 3 gauge Astral, and usually, I'd rather spend gauge on Exceed mode or Bullet Storm or something. Maybe if this attack shape were like a lot better, it might be a lot more usable. But it's like it's a parry shape, and
it is 12 delta, and
mhm,
almost a full hand reload though. That's a
yeah,
like maybe this is me being sort of numbers brain, but that's a lot of numbers.
yeah. Well, the problem is like your opponent knows about it,
Right.
and this is you kind of want to treat this kind of like a mid speed in a way. Like it's a slow, but if your opponent's like going, well, I'm Noel, I want to avoid these shapes by like crossing or grasping, like
Right. You would put Valkyrie Vale in with the rest of your mid speeds, even though
yeah.
it's just like a super amped up version of what she already has.
Yeah, like so, if they grasp or cross to beat these, they're also beating Valkyrie Vale, and
Right.
you're very sad about that because
Okay.
you spent 3 gauge for nothing. But you do get some card draw, which is a nice consolation prize, and you don't take any damage, so it's not completely terrible.
Right.
I only just recently have used Valkyrie Vale in games, and never have I hit with it. The hand reload was appreciated, but it just there's just the way games flow with Noel. It just seems like this usually just doesn't do what
Right.
you want it to.
You'd rather not take, and it's not a situation where like you're not gonna have it in your hand very often in the first place because
Hmm.
you don't want to trigger the manual reshuffle. Then your opponent will just parry it. Like there's lots of counterplay to this.
Yeah, there's a little too much counterplay to it for my taste.
Okay,
I
that
mean,
makes
you know
sense.
what? If you're in a situation where like you think it's gonna work, it's the delta's very good, and you do get to just have a full grip again. So
Yeah.
don't don't take this as a full like, oh yeah, just this attack's blank. Don't ever use it. Like I said, I've even used it,
But
and
it was unsuccessful when you used it.
yeah, it was
Right.
unsuccessful,
All
but
right.
I felt like it was the correct play at the time.
Right.
So.
That's fair. Yeah, it's definitely like there's an element for me of as still a fairly inexperienced player of like my understanding of exceed numbers for power or for delta caps out at about 8. So the idea
Mhm.
that I could have 5 armor and 7 power on a card is just kind of cool to me. and I want it to be cool. So, maybe, hey, listen, if you're out there and you're a aspiring Noel player, this will be a situation where you can prove us wrong.
Yeah.
I want this to be cool and good.
Yeah, all right, Valkyrie Veil, Rush Valkyrie Veil, Noel Exceed win.
Yeah, that's the new meta that we're gonna
It's gonna be the new meta.
yeah, we're gonna push people to discover it. Awesome. And then obviously for the same with every other Astral in the game, burst is good, but for Noel it sounds like you aren't going to have it in your hand to burst with because you aren't going to have done the manual reshuffle in the first place.
Most of the time. I mean,
Okay.
like sometimes, like when you reshuffle with Noel, it's usually because you're like, oh, I've used a lot of my threatening things. I need to refresh them.
Right.
Like you've
You-
used all
You're
your
you're
mid
not
speeds. It's time
you're
to,
not
yeah,
reshuffling for Valkyrie Veil. You're reshuffling
no,
because you need to reshuffle.
yeah.
Okay.
And Noel's not you as Noel. Usually, you'd rather just draw through the deck and get going rather than reshuffling. But
Right.
once again, this is all preference as the depending on game state, you do what you got to.
Sure. You do a big CC or you strike through your deck or you wild swing when you can't or something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right. Any questions about the strikes before we move on to the boosts? I
No,
guess.
they are remarkably simple. It's kind of
Yeah,
cool that she has a kit that is
yeah,
very legible, I feel like.
yeah.
So you want to go
Noelle
to the
is
boosts?
was designed to be one of the most simplest characters in the game.
Yeah,
So there is that. If you're new to Exceed, I recommend Noelle. Just turn your brain off and strike.
makes sense.
Well, that'll get you only so far. But if you're just starting, it's a good way to go.
Right.
All
You're
right,
you're you're pressing buttons.
yeah, just mash your buttons. All right, let's see. What do I want to talk about for Noel's boosts first? Let's talk. I guess we'll talk about some of the thematic one, or yeah, we'll talk about some the theme of being broke girl Noel here. So we'll start with, I guess, a step in on assault through here. We have a close one and strike boost.
Okay.
You know, it's all right. Noelle's a character that probably does want this boost on her kit. Sometimes you'll be like at range 4 or something. That'll be a character, and you don't have optic barrel, and you just go, well, let's just step in and you know what? Nah, assault spike. Let's go.
Right.
Um, that's the kind of the purpose for that. Or maybe you just go, okay, I'm at range 3. Step in. I'm gonna threaten type 1 or something. Um, just the thing that she can do. But you are spending a force, and then you're
And then a
striking.
then a card to strike with, sure. So
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
lot of
which
things that
means
she's doing, it's pretty expensive. And
yeah,
assault through's good.
yeah. Like
Okay, so
assault, yeah, assault through it. Like I said, it was at the bottom of that totem pole with all the mid speeds.
right,
So like you don't feel so bad about using step in as much, but it's still you still got to consider. Well, that's a mid speed down, and I am spending 2 or
right,
more if you're like using something like this, 2 or more cards to strike.
right.
So that
And
tends to be expensive.
so you're using this when your opponent makes you use it, not necessarily as part of your own game plan.
Um, it's a little of both. Sometimes your opponent will make you use this. Sometimes, it's a high tempo play. Like you're going in and you're threatening a thing the opponent thought they were safe from,
Oh,
and
sure. Okay, that makes sense. They're
yeah,
backing up to prep or something, and you spring it on them in order to keep the pressure on.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, exactly. We also have overpower on optic barrel, +1 power now strike. This is not exactly my favorite boost here. Plus, if you're spending a card to make your strike marginally better,
right.
um, it's +1 power usually doesn't help with break points. Like the best use for this is like you're at range one,
It'd be
you
like
you
sweep,
master.
right?
Yeah, exactly. You put it on
Yeah.
sweep. Um, You do that. I guess because that's the telegraphed attack. You can use this to obfuscate like a fast and mix up the opponent there. But
Right.
it's usually like if you want to beat sweep, you could do it with one card, right? So
Right.
I
True.
usually find like you don't have to, but there'll be times when you don't have this, you have sweep instead, and you want to beat their sweep, so you
Right.
play
Or
that, or
they're cornered, so you can't cross over them
yeah,
or
they're
something.
yeah, you're either cornered, you have like you just need to put some more damage on the board. Like this will have uses, but it's not something you want to mash too often just because you're playing into Noel's weaknesses by spending everything on
Right. Right.
on one strike. And I mean, it's on optic barrel, so it's not like the end of the world. It's like I said, you're not probably striking with this too often,
Right.
but
And
plus
it
one power now strike doesn't tend to solve a lot of your problems.
right. Okay, that makes sense. So, but you're not. If the situation is right for you to use it, you don't need to hold on to optic barrel forever unless you're in a matchup where you
Hmm.
absolutely need it.
Yeah, exactly.
But you did say though that you want to hit with at least one of these throughout the game because it is one of her higher damage totals.
Yeah.
So you kind of need a good reason to be spending uh
Hmm.
for overpower if you're trying to land at least one of these.
Yeah. I mean, like if say you landed one of these at the start of the game, and now you're fighting at close quarters, and it doesn't seem like you're gonna back up anytime soon. Like, yeah,
Right.
I guess you might as well like boost overpower, but
Right.
more often than not, I'd rather like use the CC action rather than hold optic barrel or boost overpower.
Okay. That makes sense.
All right, so there's the expensive stuff. Whoops. All right, we'll move on to some more. Well, we'll move on to another thing here. We have a draw three and strike boost on muzzle flitter here.
Okay.
This is one of the few economy tools for Noel. It's it's you're technically card positive because if you had just um was it if you had just struck, you'll be down a card in hand with this. Like you're spending this, you're spending a card in hand, you're spending the strike. Well, I guess technically no, you're still yeah, you're card neutral from the strike then.
Right. Unless
Um,
you wild swung
yeah,
or
if you're wild swung,
or
then you'll
something.
be you'll be
Yeah.
card yeah, you'll be card positive.
Right. So again,
Not best.
it's tempo again. It's not
Yeah, yeah.
efficiency.
Yeah, it's not efficient, but it's more tempo. Yeah, it's better to think of this as like a change cards, but with a strike.
Sure.
Because you're spending this a muzzle flitter and a card in hand to the draw three. That's a CC two, but
Right.
you're striking in the middle of it. So um, yeah, like if it's just a good way to dig for answers because sometimes you need to find the appropriate cards for Noel to either play for defense or to continue offense with. Um, the most difficult part about this boost is, it's attached to muzzle flitter. It is one of your more consistent mid speeds. So, like, if you boost this, it means one of your threats are down. But you will find yourself boosting this pretty often if you like let's say you have like your other mid speeds in hand already and you just got to find like some more diverse options.
Right. And things aren't going your way uh
Hmm.
enough to run muzzle flitter just on its own.
Hmm.
Okay. That makes sense. But it's another situation where it's like you would prefer to play the attack, but you'll often find yourself playing the boost because Noel's weaknesses as a character are economy.
Yeah, and so yeah, basically like both halves of this card are pretty valuable. They're both kind of I don't want to say expensive, but they you'd rather have draw 3, but Noel isn't privileged to get that. You'd rather have just ignore guard for free, but you're not
But she
privileged
needs
enough
to
for that.
spend. She needs to spend on it
But you
exactly.
do need to spend, yeah.
Right.
So
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
all
She's playing
right,
Poverty Exceed.
yeah. We might as well round out the mid speed boost. So we have swift attack on type 1. Hit gain advantage. Add this to your gauge and +1 speed. I don't often find myself boosting this just because it's attached to type 1, her best special.
Right.
You'd rather strike with this than boost with it. Um, Also, like, usually you don't need the +1 speed. Like, you know, you have like +1 speed on command with Noel if need be. Um, but there are situations where you do need this, like if your opponent's in the corner and you can't cross them up, then in which case, yeah, you might as well, make your next threat more threatening with the extra speed.
Right. And
Um,
+1 speed on a boost that doesn't that isn't cancelable and doesn't cause you to strike is basically the equivalent of saying like, okay, I win speed ties if my opponent
mhm.
uh, strikes into me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
If you're in
even
a mm,
really quick, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Even with this boost down, then I need to be ready for my opponent to punch me
Yeah, exactly.
because I'm not as safe as I feel like I might be by boosting speed because all I'm doing is winning speed ties.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Um, you're only winning speed ties, like, if like the other situation you'd have this is if, you're stuck at like range 3 and you can't cross up with this, right? But once again, like it's only +1 speed. Your opponent has options to like just either like boost war to change the situation in their favor, or they can take the gamble there. Like if they strike into you, and even if you like win the strike, you didn't get the full value of the boost because it's going to be your advantage either way.
Right. So
Extra gauge is nice, but
you would want to use this then in a situation where your opponent is for some reason afraid to strike into you.
that's that. I would say that's a nice bonus. When I look at this, I just go, all right. It's +1 speed when I can't gain or like the value out of this attack because I'm in a situation where crossing up the opponent is not an option,
Okay.
either because they're in the corner or I can't afford to, or like even if it's like this kind of
You
board
don't want to
state and I
position
could step
yourself
in.
into the corner
Yeah.
against them. Sure, that makes sense.
Like I don't want to. Well, you don't want to position. Sometimes you will as Noel, because if you have both copies of type one, you can come in and out.
Right.
But let's say your opponent is threatening something at range 2, like Lene's just has her gauge up and she's just insisting on staying at range 2 or something.
Right for
In that
elusive
case,
flash.
like,
Sure.
okay, well, moving to range 2 is insanity, so you're better off like maybe boosting this, saying, all right, if you don't deal with the situation, I'm going to threaten on curve spike or something at that point
Right.
with UA.
With your character ability. Oh yeah, because they do combo together for
Yeah,
plus 2 speed.
you can stack them, but for the most part, people see, oh, hit advantage and add this to your gauge. So Noelle could get 2 gauge out of this strike, and that gets her halfway to exceed. I can't let her do that.
Right. I will
Um,
aggress into her to try to deny that. That makes sense.
yeah,
Okay.
either aggress or like try to change the situation in some way. So I find like because this is so low tempo, you're like passing the turn to your opponent, and it's hard to capitalize. I'm less likely to use it, but like I said, if you can't use type 1 to its full effect, sure, you might as well boost it at that point.
Right.
Usually, like you'll be like if there's a you're in a game where like you can't strike with type 1, like yeah, you're probably in a situation where boosting it is better value.
Okay,
But if you're playing Noel to her strengths, you're using this as an attack. You're not really using the boost.
that makes sense. Okay. So
Yeah.
far we have
And
not had the most impressive boost kit in the world. It sounds like
oh
almost all
no,
of these
yeah.
you'd prefer to be striking with them, which makes sense for a character like
Usually,
Noel.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, for Noel, that is the case, and this last boost isn't really gonna help her case at all. It's we got to now close 2, add this to your gauge, and gain advantage on hit. This boost's all right. Like you can, it's force efficient movement, and it's once again it has hit add to your gauge, so it's threatening to have Noel just get immediately closer to exceed mode right there.
right,
This boost is, I would say, this boost separates the good Noel players from the bad ones. Bad Noel players go, oh man, I get to get in close to start offense, and if I hit, I get extra gauge. Hell yeah, boost this turn 1.
okay,
But you've passed, you've gotten close, and your opponent sees you have this. You could just they can just either cross out or do something to deny, try and deny you that.
right.
So
This isn't really doing very much to It actually isn't doing anything except for closing me in to make sure that the strike that I'm threatening actually hits.
yeah, essentially, it's better to think of this as just force efficient movement. And if you have extra, or if you hit with it, that's a nice bonus.
Okay,
It's not something you want to rely on. But there's going to be situations where you just need the force efficient movement. You're broke after all, and
right, sure. And I mean, you need your spring raids in order to keep your opponent from uh, crossing out or from running
mhm.
their 6 speed offense or something. But
Yeah,
co-
stuff like that. Yeah,
it sounds like compared to your mid speed suite, um, if their crosses are down or if they're not, if that's not the kind of game plan that they're running, you might not need spring raid. So maybe you'll be boosting it a bit more often in those circumstances, or is it really
I
just something that you want to
also,
be attacking with?
it's gonna depend on what your opponent has for card composition. Really, like if all they have is slows left, yeah, you might as well just boost
Right.
this, right? Um, but I mean, this is your fast, and you have a bunch of mid speeds. So to say you'll be boosting this more often than these is probably not correct there.
Yeah.
Just because you boost this, that's a fast option down. If you boost one of these, you still have the other 2 mid speeds there. So
Oh, that's true. That makes sense. All right. So you are looking to conserve this even if the one thing that you're trying to beat on your opponent's side is gone. Like this is still a
mm,
useful card,
yeah.
so maybe don't ditch it for the boost. Okay. So it sounds like pretty much all of these then are, you'd prefer to strike with them, you'd prefer to do a big reload rather than rely on the boosts unless you're in the perfect
Mhm.
situation for it.
Yeah, these, like I said, these are gonna be, they're niche, and you will encounter those niches over the course of the game. So you will be boosting with these, but if you're in the ideal Noel world, like you never would. You just strike
Right.
and you laugh. That's what you do.
Yep. Makes sense.
All right, we'll move on to her ultra boosts. We have the boost on Zero Gun Fenrir. This one's a pretty good boost. We have before advance 2 on a now strike.
Yep.
So like your opponent thinks they're safe at range, think again. But once again, this is very expensive. It is the
One force
equivalent
on
of
an
3
ultra.
force plus a strike.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
so
spending basically 4 cards on this almost.
yeah. Like there will be games where you kind of have to play this, or like just situations where it is optimal to do that, but you can't afford to do it often,
Okay.
so it's not something you care what did I get through before I was completely lost there?
We were talking about you uh you don't want to be using this all the time. Um it's really, really expensive.
Yeah.
And then you started to break down quite
Hmm.
a bit.
I mean, I mean that sounds like I got most of what I wanted to say anyway. Yeah, it's you can use it as an above curve option, but or even just a way to threaten spike at range one, though that's very telegraphed.
Right.
But uh, but yeah, like there'll be situations where you want to play this,
But
but you can't afford to play it all the time just because it's expensive, I guess.
are there any
Not much
particular
more can I say
cards
about that.
that really, really benefit from this, or is it just kind of, you know, you'll the situations where you'll play it are just when you need to get in close and you need to keep the pressure on.
It's mostly just you need to get in close and keep the pressure on because I mean most if you're at like range four, like this will work with basically everything.
Right.
You'll
And
notice like everything hits at range two with Noel. So
right. And so you're preferring to do it with a high value thing. So
mhm,
maybe it is a spike, maybe it is like a higher damage option because you want to be threatening, but really every
mhm,
single thing in her kit pretty much works.
yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
All right, and then we finally come to Power the Eye on Bulletstorm here. It's one of her lowest value boosts. You see, look at the opponent's hand and strike. Um, if you're any good at Exceed, you usually don't need to crutch on this. But I mean, if you're new, sure, why not? Like, look at your opponent's hand, see what options they have.
Right.
There is also a funny line you can do with Power of the Eye. I'd say funny, but like it can be good in the right situation. It's just expensive, as as I've mentioned before. Like if you use this and then like play assault
Right.
because you know it's going to hit or something, you can gain advantage. You know your what's in your opponent's hand. You can read them. And
Right.
you have a guaranteed reading set up. But that's a turn where you win. Okay, spend two cards to strike, and another turn where you spend two cards to strike.
Right.
So you're going to be down a lot of resources after that. But sometimes you just need to close the game with a reading, and that is one way you can make sure that it lands. So,
Right. So, like everything else, that is potentially powerful but extremely inefficient, but extremely high tempo.
mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean
Yeah, that's right.
that sounds like Noel.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, um, for the most part, among her specials, we'd be preferring to use these as attacks. For her boosts, there are use cases where you want to use these as attacks, but sometimes they might just be force.
Yeah. I find like her ultras will be it's hard to say they'll be for our like first priority
Right.
just because there'll be drive charge is a good boost, it's just expensive,
Right.
so like there will be situations where you need it, but if you're running out of cards, like these do tend to be probably the things you'll pitch first.
All right. And Noel is going to be running out of cards pretty frequently.
Yeah.
Okay. Nope, that all makes sense. So the game plan then, and also I wanna ask you a little bit about normals and how
Mhm.
that interacts with everything. But the game plan basically is to use my strike with stuff as much as I possibly can, build up to my exceed mode, continue striking, and use my cards in a way that allows me to keep striking, whether that's by boosting them, whether that's by CCing them, just keep the pressure on at all costs as long as I can afford to.
Essentially, yep.
Okay, and strike smart because I need my rushdown fundamentals here. I can't just keep swinging.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, strike smart. You can play a little bit of head empty, but yeah, you want to strike smart if you want to be successful with Noel long term. So
because she's not. Well, you have to strike smart because she's not going to be doing anything else but striking.
Yeah, essentially.
Makes sense. And then, real quick, uh, I wanted to ask a little bit about how she's going to be using her normals here. Let me,
Hmm.
yeah, move this stuff out of the way real fast because, like, specifically, like, I can see where you know most of these would benefit reasonably from additional speed from her either her character ability or especially her front side or her exceed side
Hmm.
ability. But unlike her specials, many of these normals have great boosts on them.
Hmm.
Um, are there any situations, are there any notable use cases for these normals or for their boosts that we should be highlighting? Or is she mostly using these to supplement her mix up and you're striking with them most of the time anyway?
So I would say you use normals as the situation calls for. It is kind of the answer, which is not a very interesting answer, but it is what it is.
Right.
Um, you want to just kind of use your fundamentals. Just you have a bunch of mid speed, so you need to like put in, or you have to occasionally use your things like cross, grasp, assault to keep the opponent on their toes, so that they don't just always defend on curve and try to stuff your mid speed options.
Right.
Um, you have extra mid speeds in dive and spike essentially. I guess the one thing that really comes down to or like being unique for Noel, I guess, is like her slow usage. You
Hmm.
have sweep and focus. She has no slows in her kit. And that's why I was saying, like, layer one when fighting against Noel is you could play fast so that she can't play these.
Can't play the
So
mid
which
speeds.
means which means you're gonna want to defend with sweeps and focuses quite often. Um, just because it's a way for you to actually like defend yourself and create a deterrent for the opponent from just striking on curve all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just like, and as mentioned, like because you only have like so many slows, like you gotta make sure to really keep them close to your chest. You don't want to just throw them out like carelessly there.
Right. And that
I
would
mean,
include you
usually,
that would include using reading in light then. You want to be pretty
yeah,
sure that that's going to be important to you to give up
yeah, yeah,
like your only defensive options.
yeah. I mean, like usually Noel doesn't value reading in light as much as most other characters, I find, just because, as we said, we have a bunch of cards that kind of just win and kind of hard to just answer. They're not like very far below curve on like a spike or something.
Right.
So, unless if the opponent is out of their fast answers, you don't really need a reading to make sure type one or muzzle
Sure.
flitter lands.
That makes sense.
And because you have if you really need speed, you have your UA, you don't really
You
need
don't
to
need
use
sweep,
light.
yeah. And if I
Yeah.
if I was going to use light, it would probably be on spike or dive then.
Yeah, something on
Because
spike,
for the most part
dive.
these don't need them and they don't win that hard that I would want to waste a sweep
Mhm.
on 100% guaranteeing them.
Yeah. Also,
Okay.
sweep is 6 damage, and
That's higher than
you
everything
get
else in
more
her kit.
value like getting the damage off sweep than it is trying to graft more speed to make your lower
Sure.
speed options more consistent,
That
or
makes
higher
sense.
speed options more consistent. But
Right. Is the opposite kind of true of fierce then? Are you valuing that additional
so,
power more?
um, kind of. It's not necessarily more, just because you're only above curve option that you can use to heavily confirm the threat of power is your DP.
Right.
Um, and if you're playing like if you play your grass or as a fierce, sure you make your mid speeds a little more threatening, but one of the most like universal things for like fierce counterplay is to cross, because the threat of an 8 power sweep is so
Is
brutal.
way scarier, right, than
Yeah,
everything
right.
else you're
So
doing.
And then like, oh, so if the opponent goes, you know what, I'm not eating the 8 power sweep, I'm crossing out. They incidentally beat all of this too,
Every
right?
other thing, yeah.
So
So it just makes it, unless you're specifically targeting Spring Raid, you're just going to bait across.
yeah, essentially. So
Okay.
I wouldn't say like Noel prefers having Fierce more as a result, but I mean,
Right.
if you're in a situation where like you have like a EX, like where we treat this as a mid speed, but you can use this as a fast option because it is
Right.
it is a fa- it is a
Range
fast
4.
dive at range 4. You
Sure,
can
sure.
like graft power onto this if need be. If it's one of those games where you feel like, you know what, I'm going to be using zero gun Fenrir and you have an EX in hand, like sure,
Right.
graft some power onto it and just nuke the opponent at range 1.
Right. Make it pretty much unbeatable. Um
Hmm.
the you know, if if putting if putting grasp on something is going to um make my opponent cross out, it sounds like the coolest play I could possibly do is fierce optic barrel at range 2.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean
it's
that would be the dream,
that's the
but
one circumstance where I should be using optic barrel in melee range is when I've decided to completely gamble everything on it. That seems like a great idea.
you could. I That is a gamble though, and
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
not
not.
very fond of that.
Yeah, I'm not
But
100% sure that that's a real suggestion. All I'm saying is 5 plus 2 is 7, and 7 is a break point, and it catches cross. It sounds like it's completely unbeatable to me. It sounds like it's the only thing that I should be doing ever is Noel. Please
we
don't
would do
listen
it
to
at
me.
range 2.
There's a
You know
reason that
what?
there's a reason that Bana is an expert and I'm not.
That because like the fail case for that is so steep. I'm
Yeah,
not someone who would do that. But theoretically, this checks out. Like, yeah, what is your opponent gonna do? I don't
undercurve
know.
assault, baby.
I mean, you know what? There are times like that where where they just go, you know what? I don't have an answer. I'm just gonna eat the 8 power sweep and I'll just gain an advantage and do something with the advantage instead. And when that happens, you will be very sad
Yeah,
that you
you're
went for the play.
incredibly,
But
incredibly sad. Yeah, no, like I said, not a real suggestion, audience. Maybe it's a real suggestion. I would really like it to be a real line of play. I'm not
I
sure it
mean,
is.
the other problem with that is if you're at range 2 and you boost fierce, your opponent's probably thinking, oh, they probably have spring raid in hand. I
Right. I
probably
won't.
shouldn't
I
just
won't cross. Then at
I
least the
should just
mix of
walk out or something. Yeah.
yeah. But you're right. That's probably not my quite as good as my of a dream scenario as I'm making it
I
sound.
mean, you know what? Like if it might be something you want to occasionally go for just to keep the opponent on their toes,
Put
but
it on your exceed bucket list.
put it on your bag of tricks, and if you're really feeling it, go for it.
Right. All right. And then pretty much every other normal boost I feel like has, you use these for positional stuff when you need to. You
Yeah.
use these as your diffusal options. You would prefer to strike with these. Uh, use this when you're trying to make something under curve consistent. But
Mhm.
for the most part, she's using her normals largely as normal, and you're just using them to supplement your mix up.
Yeah, you supplement your mix up with them, and or just using them when appropriate. Sometimes you need a on curve option with cross, and sometimes you're just gonna need the force efficient movement because you're broke. So you have there's no shortage of choices. You will aside from like maybe the slows here, you'll probably use every half of like everything in the fast and mid speeds uh, portion of the band.
Right, that makes sense. And then, so I mean, it sounds like that's the kit. Um, is there anything else that you want to cover about her game plan and her we've talked a little bit about economy. We actually talked a lot about economy uh, because that's such an important concern for her. Is there
Mhm.
anything else that we should be mentioning before we go into a quick discussion about counterplay and then wrap it up?
Mm, well, I guess, I might as well just reiterate your economy is pretty bad, so Noelle's primary way of getting cards back in her hand is to, CC or prepare. So, what's going to separate a good Noel player from a bad Noel player is knowing when you can take the time off to prepare or knowing when you have to do that.
Right. That makes sense.
All right, I think that covers Noel's game plan there. I
Perfect.
guess you said you want to move on to counterplay there.
Yeah. So the last thing that I tend to ask on these lessons, as you
Yeah.
know, is so you've described all the Noel things, and my opponent knows what the
Mhm,
Noel things are because they're a competent Exceed player. They're
mhm.
good, and they're working really hard to stop me from doing the Noel things. What are they doing to stop me? And more importantly, I as Noel, what am I doing to stop them from stopping me?
Stopping you from stopping them. Well, for stopping Noel, first off, you know, I would say, striking into Noel's pretty all right way to kind of counterplay her. As I mentioned before, like if you if you play fast or your fast attacks, like Noel only has universal options for slows.
Right.
So her defense. I don't want to say her defense is weak because if you ever decide, oh, I'm gonna play a sweep, it might just backfire in her face.
Right.
But as in terms of like if you can just threaten things on curve forever, like Noelle doesn't really have much recourse for that aside from maybe her DP,
Right.
but she only
And
has
and
two of
then
those.
and then oh man, I dealt 3 damage to my opponent by DPing them. It's
Hmm.
not the end of the world for them if I do that.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and like once again, like if you're one of those characters where you like, can uh consistently graft power onto fast options, like you're gonna like usually win the brawl because Noelle's options. She has a bunch of threes. Her like higher damage options are like behind ultras or a janky fireball.
Right.
Which means like if you're like playing the okay, I'm gonna hit you, you're gonna hit me game, and if you have more power than Noel, you just kill her faster than she kills you, right?
Right.
So um and another thing you can do is I guess boost war Noel. We saw her boosts. She has like one stat boost that she can really try to leverage, which was the +1 speed, and even then that's not all that impressive.
Right. And
So
among her normals, she's got good boosts, but a lot of them are on really important cards.
yeah, exactly. So,
Right.
if you can boost light to make things a little more difficult for her. You can if you're like a character like Ryu and you just have stat boosts everywhere, just like boost those and just make the proposition of striking harder for her.
Right.
She's gonna have she has like I won't say she's gonna have the most trouble. Like if you only boost +1 speed, Noel can just go, well, I don't need to boost to do that. I'll just have +1 speed on
I'll
demand with UA, right? And then
I'll
she
just
can
spend gauge
equalize the
and
situation.
yeah.
But the issue with that is it does make it more difficult for her to get to her gauge options like her like seed mode. So it's like not
Right.
exactly a lost case for you.
Right.
But
That makes sense.
and I guess another thing you can do is Noel's best stuff is like range 2. So like just if you're one of the characters that can afford to leave, just leave.
Yep.
Backstep out of range, and she has to either spend her cards to walk in, and which case you're depleting her options, or sometimes she'll have optic barrel or like run, but that's just the game we play, right? Like
Sure, sure.
sometimes they just have the answer for you, but like
And
she only has so many of each, right? So
and that might be when situations like your step in or your drive charge are important
mhm,
for like counter zoning stuff. So
exactly.
she has answers, but they're a little bit lackluster to that kind of line of play.
Yeah, yeah, they're not amazing. They work, but
Yeah,
step in and drive charge are pretty expensive. So
right.
you'll if you have like you don't want to just like throw away your whole hand to run away from Noel. That's just in that case, you're getting into the same was it income bracket as Noel. That's probably
Right.
not
Yeah.
a winning strategy. Like if you just have like force efficient movement everywhere, yeah, you can definitely just kite Noel and show off your better I guess
Your stock
economy
options, your
strategy. Yeah,
401k.
exactly.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. What does Noel do about just overwhelming stat boosts then? Like she's got some answers to zoning and runaway, but what does she do when her opponent can just do the Ryu thing and say, I'm big every turn. I have big scary stats every
Mhm.
turn.
I mean, so being like having big scary stats is not a guarantee, right? So like even if you have +2 speed, the risk of having +2 speed and sitting on it is your opponent might just call the mix up correct anyway. You could go, well, I have +2 speed and I'm gonna try and threaten my spike or something, and then your opponent just plays assault and then you're sad, or like
Right,
they just decide to diffuse it with cross or something. Um, like as Noel, sometimes you will just have to take that risk and strike. Um, you also just like it's also a lot of it is knowledge of the matchup and knowing, okay, is this going to be a matchup where the opponent's going to boost a whole bunch of stuff, and it's trying to find or like make sure your techs are alive, making sure you have the right strikes to diffuse like the worst case scenario, right?
right,
Um,
and so
like you
you're making them if they're threatening a a spike at range 2, they're also threatening like a cross at range 2, and if you
said,
initiate into them with your assault, you're making them uh you're making them beat you with a lower damage option. Is
yeah,
that kind of the math
that
there?
is the theory, yeah. Like,
Okay.
you're still losing the strike there, but, it's still better than just letting them have just have every or going for, like, the best option every single
Right.
time, right?
So
I
basically
mean,
the answer then is to just diffuse it as you can, either by changing the situation or teching it or just striking into them, and then just run your mix up better to make up for it.
yeah,
Okay.
essentially. There's also, like, if your opponent is boosting stats, yeah, there's always the option to go, "You know what? I'm losing this strike anyway. We'll take this time to start curating my hand."
Right. Yeah. To
Because
you're
if
like
you
finally a break. I can take time off while your opponent
yeah,
is like
yeah,
going Super Saiyan across from you.
yeah, exactly.
I
It's
gotcha.
it's not it's not ideal to like take a huge hit, but the it is what it is. You'll just have to try and sculpt your hand so that you can make it up in the next few strikes when it is your turn to start rushing them down.
Right. That makes sense. All right. Cool. No, that all makes sense. She sounds fun. She sounds like she's skill testing. She's making you rely on those fundamentals, which is interesting.
Mhm.
Super excited to try her out. I hope that people listening or watching this are excited to try her out too. Bana,
Mhm.
any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, not really, but I said no, but I had one thing, which was, I said this earlier. If you're new to Exceed, Noel's very straightforward. Like I said, it's she's skill testing, but her game plan's very straightforward. It's just we're gonna try and advantage chain people to death.
Right.
So she's a very good place to start. So anyone who's just getting into the game, I highly recommend Noel.
Awesome. Yeah, no, definitely. Uh, I probably have been playing too long at this point to call myself a new player, but I'm definitely new to rushdown, and I really want to get better at that. So I have to I've got to expand my horizons outside of my defensive set play bubble. So I'm looking forward to putting some of the stuff you told me into practice
Yeah,
with her.
if you're new to Rushdown, I also recommend Noel just because it's a very good way to dip your foot into like aggressive play there.
Right. And
Um,
she doesn't really have anything else that she can rely on. She kind of has to be a rushdown
mhm.
character. So
Yeah,
you
it'll force you into the lines of like aggressive play just because you don't really have an alternative.
right.
And once you actually like get to the fun part, you just get to have a good old time.
Yeah. All right, Bana, thank you again so much, as always, for your expertise and your
Oh, yeah.
time. I really, really
No,
appreciate it.
thanks for having me, and apologize for any of the audio issues over
Oh,
the
don't worry
course of
about it.
this one.
Nah, it'll be fine. Well, the audience will probably not know about it at all. Or now that we're
I'm
talking,
sure.
no, now that we're talking about it, it's a reference, so we have to keep it in. That's
Ah,
that's
yes.
that's going to be my excuse for not editing this episode.
Curses. I have undermined myself.
Yeah, yeah. While during the cut, audience, Bana said some really heinous stuff, really just awful. So we had to cut that out. All right,
Yep.
everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. And Bana, thank you again. And I will talk to you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.